So today I just want to take some time and go over some of the questions that have been asked on YouTube and our Battery Acid Discord. Let's start over at YouTube, and I'm really going to try to keep it multiplayer focused today. I know there's some questions that may go off of that topic, and if I can, I'll try to answer them. So the first thing we got down here, client server will not fully prevent cheating. It still takes a lot of resources. Hosting servers takes a lot of resources as well. If you have a small team, competitive multiplayer is impossible, especially if it's your first time in multiplayer period. Well, I mean, that's a lot of definitely's, and I understand the sentiment that you're trying to illustrate here, where of course nothing will fully prevent cheating, right? It's really about like what you can do to mitigate potential cheating, right? So there are certain best practices that you can follow, but if you are giving your clients authority over things that they shouldn't have authority, you're just going to increase the chances of cheating. And I think a client to server where your server is authoritative is naturally more mitigating as a means to prevent cheating than just like P2P or giving full player authority or giving the full client authority over that player object versus just like inputs, because you're allowing them to send malicious or bad inputs to the server. Whereas if you have that server authority, your server is allowed to make checks and keep things where they should be and prevent those malicious attempts to send bad data to the server. So ultimately, I don't think I was trying to, with this how to choose a multiplayer backend, I don't think I was saying anything that would warrant this type of comment. I think maybe they're not saying that. Maybe they're just making a statement about it. That's fine. I agree. Nothing will fully prevent cheating. It's about mitigation and practices that you can do to, and what those practices that you can implement to reduce it. Hosting servers takes a lot of resources. Yeah, sure. There is definitely more money in hosting a dedicated server, I would say overall, as a generic statement, but it really depends on your game. I think that you can have a simple, if you wanted to have a more back-end server, there are ways to implement it that's not just like a strict dedicated server hosting setup where you're going to pay those server fees. Like if you were just making a really simple card game, you could probably have a somewhat reasonable amount of people playing your games and use like a Lambda or some type of serverless back end where maybe you just need a WebSocket because you're not trying to synchronize, first person players shooting and jumping around some world, right? You're just synchronizing actions at a relatively slow pace. I mean, and if you even had like a somewhat of a paced game, you could probably get away with WebSockets to a degree. But again, it really depends on the type of game you're trying to implement. And like, I think the comment here about competitive multiplayer is impossible. And I think they're meaning like competitive first person shooter style games and that kind of thing. I don't know if I would say isn't possible. I think if it's your first time, you're definitely going to struggle with it. I think there's a lot to learn for, setting up a competitive multiplayer game and like a first person style fast paced game. Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult. But I'm not trying to be, I wouldn't go so far to say it is impossible. I would just say it's really difficult, but I'm also going to say that, and I believe I allude to this over, the next year after I made that video, that it's basically, you should always try to focus on the easiest path forward to get started in multiplayer and just get something done and go through that experience to get familiar with multiplayer. And then you'll have a much better time making those next steps, decisions, and that kind of thing. So don't get too bogged down when you're just starting out. Just make something, have some fun with it, and you'll be surprised probably with what you can make. Maybe I would say if it's your first time making a FPS multiplayer game, it would definitely be challenging. maybe start with something easier. Did you already see OpenGB? So OpenGB is I believe, a module of Rivet. Here, let me just Google it again. Here, if I click on OpenGB, it takes me to Rivet. So OpenGB is a printer control interface as well as that. So I believe, I hope that they're referring to this Rivet program here, this Rivet asset that has implemented it looks like they renamed at some point. This was updated 13 hours ago, so maybe they just, that'd be really funny if they had just initial commit 13 hours ago. What? This is crazy. What did they commit? OpenGB. Yeah, I don't know, that's weird. How am I like just stumbling upon this? Maybe people were, oh, that's really weird. Maybe people were searching for it and they just happened to put that commit out there as a placeholder right when I'm about to. Anyways, cool, man. So I think this is worth spending some time on and worth actually doing a follow-up detail on it. I think this is I've played around, or I didn't play around, but if this is what this person is referring to on YouTube, I have not played around or have experience using Rivet, but they appear to take care of a few server side things that you're going to need alongside your multiplayer game, those ancillary things to, get your game up and running, lobbies, party systems, authentication, seeing your friends list, and of course leaderboards, analytics. These are all important things, and it looks like they also handle dedicated servers, upload your builds. Again, this is really the first time I'm looking at this, and they do offer a plugin. It says open source and self-hosted. Again, I haven't dug into this. I don't know if there is a pricing model, so I'm guessing that they do offer services. Yeah. So they offer a node in LA, in Frankfurt, which is Germany, and Tokyo. So you get a little bit of world region saturation there. So that's nice. And you get a few things out of the box with them. And their rates seem to be pretty good. They do offer auto scaling, which is amazing. Like if you're an indie dev, you don't have enough money and you want to just run a server, I mean, it looks like you're starting out around $7 a month for a decent set of hardware. I'm not advertising for them. I have no idea, but they do offer some different pricing, it looks like. So, and along with the things that they offer, this seems really cool. I'm actually really interested in checking this out. They do support Godot. Let me just go back to it really. Yeah, where was it? Yeah, here, Godot. They have some links that may or may not work. I've been kind of clicking around and some of these things just like if I clicked on one of these things, it just kind of blew up. But yeah, anyway, I haven't spent enough time to introduce this. I think it would be fun to do a video on Rivet. I'm going to be doing a review of W4 soon, I think. And I think as part of that, maybe we'll check this out as well to kind of do some comparison. But oh, look, I got some game code examples. Okay, so yeah, that doesn't look too bad. So they have so you're going to install this asset library, and then you're going to tap into that library using their Rivet APIs. Here's an example of using a matchmaker, and you can set that up. It looks like it's pretty similar to Steam and how Steam would work, and they even have a Docker example, which is really nice. So definitely look into these guys if you're poking around as an indie dev for Godot. I'm definitely curious. I don't really see where their hosting stuff is, where you can host a dedicated server. I'm assuming I'll have to create an account to get into that side of things. I haven't researched these folks at all, so I really no idea who's behind it and the extent of which features are supported. But just right off the bat, it looks like multiplayer is supported. So this so I'm just going to reply that, I haven't really checked them out, but they seems like a good place to start. And I think that they also, when it says open source, I'm wondering if it says self-hostable. So that means there's going to be a backend. And maybe that's what this Rust stuff is. Maybe, so they support Godot, and here's the plugin, and they have an example project. And it looks like they also support HTML, which is really cool. There's a lot of people that want to host their game somewhere. You really don't need anything special to host an HTML game. You can probably host it anywhere. But I wonder if Rust and Go is their backend, because it is self-hosting. So I'm guessing you can host it on their cloud. Yeah, okay, there's their cloud, and then here's their setup guide. So there's two ways to run it as a dev container. Is that like Docker or something? What is that? Okay, so it looks like you can use Docker, and then that makes sense. And then the virtual machine is like running it as a daemon. All right, so they have a couple ways to do it. So depending on whatever your flavor is of clustering or scaling or that kind of thing, or if you just, whatever you have access to, maybe you like Docker, or maybe you just want to run it on a Linux server. So they have a couple ways to do it. So yeah, it looks like you can clone something over here. Again, like I haven't, but yeah, anyways, I'm not going to get into it, but it does look like they support a bunch of stuff if you want to self-host, if you're not interested in using their service. So it can definitely be a cheaper option. So I'm going to just put a couple links in there in case anybody stumbles upon this. Yeah, I have no idea how long these folks have been around. Let's check out their Godot plugin. How long have they been working on it? I mean, they're pushing out updates fairly quickly. And there was pushes or commits last year. So it doesn't seem super brand new. It seems somewhat. And okay. So here's the backend server, if you're interested in that. So yeah, thanks for the tip. I think that's really cool. Can you please make a tutorial about how dedicated servers have multiple instances, maybe orchestrating with Swarm, or I guess that's what's K? Is that Kubernetes? That will make my day. Kubernetes, yeah. So this is a little bit more advanced for where I'm at with the progression of the channel. I do want to do this. I do want to show clustering. I think for studios that are serious about it, it's something that they'll eventually need if you have that type of game. There are probably dozens of services out there that will cluster. I just talked about this Rivet service. I think W4, it does that. What was the other one that they mentioned down here? Nakama. I think Nakama is really expensive from the little bit of research that I've done. I don't have that clustering. You're saying orchestrating clustering. I think I'm saying the same thing. And I think these are like, Swarm might be a Kubernetes specific keyword, but like AWS has a service called ECS, which I've used before for clustering and auto scaling. And like I said, those two or three other services I mentioned a minute ago also offer that. If you're a serious enough developer to be at the point where you need clustering, then yeah, you're gonna have to dig in, because yeah, of course I would love to do a tutorial on there, but I'm not gonna be able to cover everybody's exact use case with that. So you're gonna have to figure out, do you want to package your stuff as a Docker container and then have your individual instances, just instances of your Docker game, your Dockerized game, and spawn that way. And I think that's probably a really good way to do it. I'm clicking on the wrong comment. Yeah, but I think that's a good way to get started with it, is using Docker, and instead of just trying to manually start things somewhere. You can do that. You can create an image and just spawn that image in a cluster, or maybe a swarm, if you want to call it that, and have those things auto scaled. I don't have plans to do it right now. Eventually I will. I think that's the ultimate goal. But again, my channel right now is kind of easing into multiplayer and trying to lay the groundwork to have as many people as possible come in to Godot and get started with multiplayer. And I think just running a dedicated server is kind of that first step. And if you can get to that point, then, and if your game is ready to expand upon that, well, that's a pretty serious step to take, and you may need to hire somebody. That's not something to take lightly. You can learn it yourself. I'm not trying to discourage you. There's just a lot to it. Thanks. I'll try to work Steam plugin for multiplayer, and it would be good if you could make a video on this topic, as you said, because there's a lot of information about Steam servers. Steam servers is something specific where it's I think you have a like anonymous or server version of a Steam build, and I'm not sure if that's what you mean, but yeah, I can eventually do a video on that. I don't have plans right now, but yeah, I think that's a good place to start. So Godot Steam has some different types of projects. Here, Godot Steam server. I'm not sure if they mean this. I'm assuming this is like if you want your backend server to maybe authenticate or run as a standalone server for some reason. I'm not 100% sure on what the use case is for this, for the Godot Steam server build. I think this has been updated recently. This looks different to me. Like, I guess maybe if you don't want Steam to run in the clients and you want them to run only as part of the backend, I'm thinking that's maybe what this use case is for. I'm not 100%, but I'm going to let you look into that and you can get back to me and I can follow up with you. But check that out. So great tutorial. Follow up personal project. Try to get some things multiplayer to work. However, I do have an issue. Can't when spawning in players, they don't get added on the client side. There's a couple reasons why players can't spawn. One of the biggest things is the multiplayer spawner. So here's my game. This is my main game scene for this 3D template I'm working on. I have a multiplayer spawner. So you're asking, why aren't your players spawning? Well, you need to make sure that you have a path where you want them to spawn. So that's this node right here under this world object. So you got to make sure that you have a path for them to spawn. And then you have to have the scene that refers to the player that you want to automatically spawn. So I have a player scene, which represents the player object. So this full scene here. So what that means is when you add, by setting this configuration right here, by setting a place where they spawn and then setting the scene that you wish to spawn when it detects it added, you're basically, but with this configuration, you're basically telling the multiplayer spawner, when I add a player of this scene to this point, I want you to automatically spawn it and synchronize that player to all of the all the clients in the game. So that's what I just talked about, is like half, and then the other half is actually adding them to the game. So if you want to look at how I'm doing it, it should be exactly the same to what you're doing. So when your client or server, if you're hosting a game, or maybe if you're not hosting a game, you won't add a player, right? But if you have like a dedicated server and then a client peer, whichever you want to call it, joins, you need to create that player, instantiate them, and I just set a position, and then you need to add them as a child on the server side. If you're using the multiplayer spawner, like, you can manually add things and synchronize them, but that's a little bit out of scope for this topic. But you need to add them. So this player spawn point is referencing this right here. So I have like I don't know if it's composition or something. I don't remember how I set it up, but somehow this guy knows. I don't know. Maybe I just created this and added it or something. I don't exactly, or actually I do remember. So I have multiplayer manager right here, and I literally drag over through like composition. I just drag over a reference to this spawn point, and then you just add that player to the spawn point, and that's it. That's what will add that player to be shared across the other clients that when they connect to it. And I do it on a connect callback. So to just kind of elaborate a little bit more, when a client connects, I've, on my server side, I have this signal set up. And again, I've covered this extensively in several videos. I just keep repeating the same thing. And I'm just reviewing it now just in case maybe something will click, but it is in that video. I do talk about this in the video, but what happens is I have a signal here set up, and once a client connects, that signal gets hit, and this is server side, right? I've set this up on my server. This ready function is if we're hosting a game, whether it's dedicated server or not, this hosting game will be true. So this is really only going to run on a server. And so this callback only needs to run on the server. I guess there might be a use case. I don't think that makes sense. But yeah, so this is going to be a server-side thing. And I just called to that same function that I just reviewed a minute ago that adds the player to the game. So when player connects, you have a signal, and then you call to some function or some code that adds them to that player spawn point. And that should do it. So if you're doing something else, or maybe you have like a order of operations problem, maybe your callbacks aren't getting hit. There's several possibilities here. So what else? So the jump state machine has completed. Oh, okay. Okay. So I think I read about this already. So the jump state machine, what they're referring to at the 26-minute is there is a artifact that's happening where my player, he's switching from one animation to the other, or yeah, through like a jump to land animation. And I'm using the state machine, and the player like flings his arm out and goes to a default T pose. So I think this person's trying to offer a solution to why that's happening. So he's saying that the state machine, the jump specific state machine, has completed its job. The input isn't there anymore. So then it transitions to a motion transition, and it's crossfading for 2 seconds with no starting point. So it uses the default T pose for the crossfade. An extra idle animation at the end of the state machine after the land without an add end or conditions, mashing crossfade as the transition leaving state machine, and it should remove the T pose shader. Okay, that was a mouthful, but I think that makes sense. And I just want to say that I believe I fixed this issue in a later video, like 1 or 2 videos after this, because I stayed on that track for a little bit. But I like what they're saying, and I think there are little things you have to do in animations, and especially like animation state machines, where you're trying to go from one animation to another. And to add to this, maybe putting in an idle state that the state machine falls to during the crossfade will prevent that T pose from getting thrown up. I don't know. I haven't looked at that in like 6 months. So yeah, that could totally be a reasonable solution. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure. But what I did figure out later on was when I actually talk about the video, the animation. So I have this blend, and it's blending between, maybe I have a bigger view. Let me see if I can back up. So what this is doing is it's blending between my main base animations, and I described this in detail in this video, by the way. And then I have this blend which has filters that's based off like whatever weapon I currently have, so that if you have like a two-handed weapon, you can like aim up and down, and that animation will blend the top half of your body using a combination of whatever current animation. Like if you're running or idling or walking, it takes whatever arms or whatever bones that you need to animate, and it filters on those based on whichever weapon you have selected, and then it applies that specific stance down here in this state machine. So it could be like a single-handed weapon, whatever, and then or between a two-handed weapon or whatever, sword or knife, whatever weapons you do or want to have in your game, you can do something like that. One thing I'm doing in here, and I think I ran into a T-pose problem or some kind of transition problem, which I believe would be helpful to note here, is to add to that comment, I mean, in the YouTube comment, is I'm immediately taking this blend and setting it to 0 or 1. And I think having a transition over like a few frames between 1 and 0 to slowly turn off, like if you're in weapon stance and you want to go back to run, by snapping it to 0, you kind of end the animation too quickly and you get this weird snap effect. So I think the fix is to also, if you're using like a blend or something, to transition over some delta or over some duration, instead of just immediately snapping to 0 or 1 or turning it off and on. And I believe I mentioned that in a comment. I do not have a lot of comments in this video. This is a really good animation video. I wish more people would find this, because I've had several other people review this this type of setup, and it seems to be a pretty solid implementation. Now, maybe the use case isn't very relevant, because I think I'm doing something a bit of hack that should be done through like inverse kinematics, but I think their inverse kinematics at that point was a little shaky, and maybe they've made some improvements since then. So I had to figure out a different way to blend the animations. But anyways, yeah, I think that's a pretty good video. If you're interested, physics gun, what's going on? Thanks for the awesome content. Do you know of any way to locally test having lags and input drops? I don't think Godot has anything like that built in, but there is a tool that you can download, Clumsy. So most people are developing on Windows, so I'm going to be able to cover most of the viewers with that. So yeah, check out Clumsy if you're interested. So thanks for answering or asking that question, because that does come up a lot. So thank you, appreciate it. And just to show you, oh, and by the way, Sub7, this guy Sub7, he's been helping me out too. And a shout out to the Fox Sake server. They are the developers of NetFox, and the main developer is Element Bound. And he's given me some good feedback on my recent state-based project that I'm working on. But Sub and a couple other guys in here, where's he at? Schnozzlecat have been a great help. So they've kind of helped me out through my thread here. So thanks. I just want to give a shout out to those guys. So thank you for that. But yeah, Sub7 has a little thing he was posting and wanted some feedback about something. But you can see I'm going to just hijack his little thing here. And you could see that you can introduce lag, and you can actually set the lag, inbound or outbound lag, and you can drop packets. So that like hooks into your local, I believe it hooks into your local network. Yeah, check it out. I think that's going to be really helpful for Godot developers. So good, awesome question. Thanks for coming by. Will this work in 3D? Okay, so will this work in 3D? And he's referencing, or they are referencing, my tutorial on when I just introduced Brachy, multiplayer to Brachy's. Okay, so networking, it basically means it's platform independent. It doesn't matter if your game is 2D or 3D. Remember, you're just sending data, and Godot out of the box without bringing any libraries or anything provides you a networking framework, a network's APIs, a stack of networking APIs that you can have access to connect to a server. And your server doesn't care if you have a 2D game or a 3D game, right? It just needs to host some server build. And you can use the same technology whether you're making a 2D game or a 3D game or a 1D game or a 4D game. I'm just making shit. Okay. It doesn't matter, right? So what matters is where it becomes important is what you're synchronizing. So that's really where the differences are going to be. Like a 3D game is going to be more intensive generally than a 2D game is, because, or a card game would likely be generally less intensive. So then a first person shooter, a turn-based game is going to be less intensive than a platformer, because you're tracking less things in a multiplayer game. So meaning you're sending less data over the network. There's less data that needs to be synchronized quickly. So the speed at which things can be synchronized are going to be slower in maybe a turn-based card game style thing versus something like this Brachy's demo where you're, tracking people in real time. So to answer your question, it absolutely will work. When it comes to server IP constant, you said you change it to your IP address to host it online from your PC for your friends, but I can use an IP as a constant, or does it need to be IP forwarded? I don't know behind the scenes exactly which is supported from Godot. Okay, so definitely check the docs. I know I said that you can change it to your IP address and host it online from your PC. I think there's going to be a little bit more involved than that. Yeah, I don't have a tutorial yet on the P2P stuff where you can open up, where you have to allow for NAT punch through and the techniques involved with that. I didn't have anybody readily available to test for that, and I kind of got sidetracked with a bunch of other stuff, but I would like to do that eventually. How can I make it? Can you join through a code? I think you're saying, can you make can you allow people to join your multiplayer game through a code? So yeah, I think if you're just saying like you want to give out like a unique code, I mean, you can use email address, but I mean, it's not very secure, right? Because then anybody that has your email address or whatever your code is, they could just take it, unless you're talking about like authentication and you're getting a token. But I don't think that's what you mean. I'm not really sure what you mean by a code. I would need to I would need a little bit more information to be able to answer that question. But there are various degrees of authenticating a person is able to connect to your game. I'm assuming that's what you mean, and play as a client to some server. And there are like half a dozen ways I can think of on top of my head, probably. Username and password. You can use one-time password. You can probably just do email, but you're going to need like a server somewhere that validates this. So you would have to have like some kind of back end somewhere where when someone puts in the code, you have to validate that it's a valid code and that person can join your game. So if let's say you're making a game and you want people to join via a code, I don't think that's a good idea. But if you're trying to just do something easy and you don't want other people to connect to your server or something like that, you can have like a database that sits somewhere and you can just give the people that you want to connect to your game, and then you can just give them like that unique code that only you know because you're the administrator, and then you just pass that code through text message or something, or through Discord private message to them. Then they can launch your client and put in that code, and then when you say like connect, it'll pass that code along with the connection handshake stuff, and then you can check with a database that you have to make sure that code is valid. So that is possible. There's some issues with that, but I think I don't think you're worried about that if you're just asking about a code. But yeah, I think you can do that. I guess you don't have to have a database. Now that I'm typing it out, you could just hard code some codes, but then if like somebody leaked the code and posted their code on Discord, right, that's where this big security concern comes, because you got to make sure you trust everybody that you give your code to, or you just don't care if it gets leaked. But if it does, and now if you have it hard coded in your game server, you're going to have to create a new build, and maybe you don't care about that either. And that's not a big deal for you to create a list of new codes to track who's authorized to join my game client or my game backend. So it's really up to you. I don't think that's a great approach for production. I think there's probably like a list of security problems with just simple code based approaches to authorization. And I've just named one of them, but yeah. So my Unity doesn't find the libraries of, Unity stuff. Oof. I haven't looked into Unity stuff in like over a year. Put it in my plugins though. What am I doing wrong? Okay. So Unity custom game lift, off the top of my head, something like it doesn't find my SDKs. I can't believe I just remembered this. There was like a 1 and maybe 200 chance that I was going to remember this, and I just remembered it. So these links are probably obsolete now, because GameLift and Amazon are constantly changing, and I keep getting posts about this. How do I download the SDK? They're not there. This is brand new. This was not here like up 6 months ago. Like I think maybe even 3 months ago. I don't remember seeing this. And if this is how you have to download SDKs now, good for them, because this was such a pain to find before. What's the difference? Oh, one's the plugin version. I didn't use the plugin version, so I'm not going to talk about that. I have used it for a client. It's actually really cool. And it's probably even better now, the newer versions. I think I was using a 4.0 version, and they're like a whole version and a half ahead of it. So I would say, can you actually download this? You can't. Okay. So that's amazing, because I thought before it was a pain to find those download links. So I'm really glad that it only took like 2 clicks to get there from my project still. So kudos to them for keeping that up to date. I think you're missing a link file where you list out the SDK projects. It's unlikely that it's not finding the whole thing. Like if it's not finding the whole SDK at all, then you've got something fundamentally wrong. If it's just not finding some of the APIs, check for this thing called it's like a link.xml file that you have to add to the project, to the Unity project. And I think you have to list in there the specific libraries that you want to use. Like if you want to use Lambda or DynamoDB from your server, or whatever, maybe there's an S3 integration. Maybe you needed some authentication like Cognito for your client build. Maybe you're not doing this for your backend. Maybe you're doing this for client, or if you're doing it for your backend, you know, like I said, maybe you're connecting to DynamoDB or S3 or something, and you want access to that library. You have to add this thing to it. Man, it is a pain to get to the Unity docs for AWS. They're still making it a little difficult. You have to add this file. It should be on this page. So when you find those references, make sure you write them down. Yeah. All right. This is what I'm talking about, but this is something specific for iOS. And this isn't going to help you with the format of the name, but you're going to have to put this link.xml, I think, in every single SDK element, including AWS core. You're going to have to list the name. And if you look at the SDK, it'll actually say like AWS core. So you have to put the name there. And then you're going to have to put the package name there like this for each one. So each one will be a reference to that. And so look for that file, that link file, and how to create that. And I believe that should help you, but I can't find it. Anyways, if I find it, I will come back and post, but I got to move on. Oh, you know what? I bet you I have a really simple example and I completely forgot. This is an example of what that's going to look like. You're going to add AWS core. You're going to add AWS Cognito identity and security token. You're absolutely going to need those. Is this something I wrote? No, this feels like something I wrote. So you're absolutely going to need these in a link.xml file. So, okay, here, check out this issue, what they're doing. Can you link this system to Steam? Okay, so this is referring to my 3D multiplayer game, this guy right here, which is not going to connect to anything because I think I have the host. No, it is. So if I host a game, and I join a game. So this is using NetFox as of today. I haven't pushed out the code yet. I just finished the video on it, but it is working. It's a little 3D template. So it's in reference to that. And they want to know, can you link it to Steam? Okay, I don't know what link means. I need some more articulation on what you mean by link, but I'm guessing like Steam authentication or maybe Steam achievements. Yeah, everything can be linked to Steam. You don't even have to use all the functionality. If you want to use Steam, once you get into the Steam you can use the Steam ecosystem with really any game type, even if it's not P2P. Like if you put your game on Steam and you just want to use Steam as like a means for authentication or to share achievements for your game, whether it's multiplayer or single player, yeah, you can use Steam. Use Godot Steam. Literally, it's called Godot Steam. I've got some videos on how to use P2P setups. I haven't done their other stuff like authentication yet, but it seems pretty straightforward. So I plan on doing some videos on that in the future whenever I get my game on Steam. And yes, I plan on working on a game soon. You can access a bunch of whatever functionality you want from Steam, and you gotta just make sure that they have a Steam account when they're using your game. If you are referring to P2P, like I'm saying, that's a whole other thing. But if you mean like could NetFox work with Steam, it should be able to. I've actually tested it, and it has worked for me. But is just make sure you're not using a mesh P2P style, where you need to make sure that you have like one of the peers act as the host. And the reason for that is the maintainer of NetFox has some hard-coded values to make sure that there's always like one authority. And if you're using a mesh style P2P, which I don't have experience with, but if you wanted to do something like that, you may have to either go in and edit NetFox to work for you, or maybe just not use NetFox, if that's what you mean. If you're just talking about, can you use a game with Steam, this specific template. Yeah. So if you want, provide some more clarification and I can follow up again. Well, I love these videos. I'm not sure teaching people to just learn to lean on plugins in lieu of actual code skills required to do compensation yourself. What happens if we hit a problem with the plugin or the plugin gets deprecated? Where should we go to learn the code ourselves from scratch? Yeah, so I can say a little bit about this. So the algorithms behind lag compensation, specifically the one that NetFox is implementing, which is a version of client-side prediction and server reconciliation, that there are white papers written about this, and there are like various degrees of, I guess, implementation specifics that can be considered or not considered, and based on like your gameplay. For example, like, do you know what, how, to what level are you going to reconcile your rollback mechanisms? And then there is like a high level version of that I believe NetFox has implemented, and that there are plugins for Unity that have implemented that, and making sure that your clients have the same clock and are ticking on the same actions in the same, at the same time, not at the literal same time, but that they handle those that they're handling the same actions at the same tick. Those actions will get handled on the server and then reconciled back to the client, and then adjusted or corrected as needed, or reconciled as needed. So there are like various degrees of how to implement this. So if you want to join my Discord, if you want to join Battery Acid Dev's Discord, I have a resources forum, and I started a lag compensation and strategies resources forum for you because I knew you were going to ask this. I made this June, so I made this like 4 months ago for you to ask this 5 hours ago. So I knew that you were going to ask that. So you can start and read through and watch all these YouTube videos. This is like the holy grail, this Gabriel Gambetta article behind how it is. I really feel like somebody with intimate knowledge, maybe like the NetFox guy, needs to go through this and annotate it and add and like make a YouTube video of them just talking to this and talking about their experience, because this is only going to get you so far. You have to dive in, and like you're basically asking, is it better to just learn this stuff instead of leaning on plugins? You're kind of alluding that it's better to, you should learn it yourself. And I'm not saying I agree with that, but this stuff is pretty complex, and I think it would be helpful if somebody in the community that has intimate details could do a video and walk us through this. I don't even have that level of understanding of the algorithm to be able to do that, because like I understand what they're saying in the white paper, but there's a big difference between like kind of conceptually understanding that and then actually being able to go in and write that code, because it takes a lot of time to write that. And I feel that while this is a pretty good point, yeah, it might not be the best thing, but I don't think that a lot of developers would find that realistic, that comment realistic. I think that a lot of us want something that works and has a lot of support and a lot of eyes on. And if you write it yourself, you're relying on just you or your specific team and the eyes on your team in hopes that you guys are covering all the bases that you need to implement that algorithm correctly. Whereas if you use a open source public with maybe dozens, or in the case of maybe like some Unity stuff, hundreds, if not thousands or millions of people who have their eyes on this plugin that can add issues and give feedback to the community. That is one of the biggest reasons why I picked NetFox and didn't try to do this on my own, because I can go dig up my Discord history. I talked to NetFox one-on-one, and I told him I wanted to implement a version of this, like a real basic version, basically kind of like what maybe you're alluding to, like a really basic version of lag compensation. And I wanted to do that. And he just was like, dude, why would you do that? He's like, don't do that. Like, that is a lot. He's like, at least use my tick networking, tick synchronization tools that he's built in, because like the way that it's built, you can kind of abstract those different areas, or there's the different fundamental concepts that are involved in that compensation strategy. He's kind of abstracted them out into nice different scripts. Yes, there's room for improvement there. I'm not saying it's perfect yet. But yeah, he was even recommending why waste your time on that. And my response was kind of like what you're saying. Well, I want to learn. I want to have that intimate knowledge of it. But I think time gets the best of us. And I haven't had the time to even do that. I mean, it just catches up with the best of us. So I'm having a hard time answering this succinctly, but if you want to learn about it, you're going to have to really beat your head against it. There's Unity docs that I found recently from playing around with or asking some questions in the NetFox Discord that will also help you illustrate. And I really love this, how it gives you step-by-step walkthroughs of what that implementation looks like. And by the way, this algorithm here, this lag compensation strategy, these aren't all for the same lag compensation strategies. There are more than one. Like Snowpeck Games introduced one that is a little different. It's similar. I don't want to comment it on today. I haven't looked at it for a couple months, so I don't want to say something wrong. But he's got a bunch of tutorials on what his implementation looks like, and that is a Godot specific implementation. So please go check him out. And I think that his version of this wasn't something he invented, right? It's like a more deterministic version of the strategy that NetFox did, but I don't think that's correct what I just said. But so whatever, scratch that. Go check it out. Go watch his YouTube videos. He has a whole series on them. But all these links here, like Gaffer on Games, he's got a deterministic lockstep. That's what it was. That's what I believe Snowpeck Games is doing. Whereas NetFox is client-side prediction and server reconciliation. This GDC Vault networking physics is also touted as a really good overview of what that's going to look like of the algorithm. Valve, there's some Valve articles here, and again, there's different levels of how deep you want to go with this strategy. And to develop it on your own, you're going to have to make some decisions like, okay, what level of compensation do I want to have? But there's so many pieces to this. It's just, I think when you say like, I'm not sure teaching people to lean on plugins, I'm not really teaching people I'm just providing this information. I'm not telling them that they shouldn't go learn about it, right? I have a whole set of resources here if they want to learn about it, right? I love learning about it. So I'm with you. I like learning about this stuff. And I was on the verge of doing it, but I don't have the time to do it. And I think a lot of developers share that sentiment. I think everybody should read through some of these things, like this Gabriel Gambetta article, at least that one, to understand what you're actually doing behind the scenes. Because when you do get a bug, you'll have a better gut feeling. Or, I mean, I've revisited this thing so many times during the course of my NetFox video, trying to figure out like, how do I say these things and stuff? And I still probably didn't get it right half the time, but yeah, there's a lot to it. And to kind of talk to, I think, the second half of the statement, what happens if the plugin hits a problem, gets deprecated, or we should go to learn to code, or where should we go if we want to learn? I kind of answered that. And to add to this, go look at people that have already done it. Go look at the Unity implementations. There's several videos in the Unity world because the algorithm is the same, right? So you're just copying that algorithm, and whether or not you'll be able to implement those algorithms exactly like the Unity folks are, because I already saw some discrepancies between the two engines. That's another discussion to have, but at least you'll get direction with that. Now, to kind of step back to where I was trying to go with this was, what happens if you hit a problem or a plugin gets deprecated? Well, that's one reason why you use an open source plugin, because you can go to his repository, multiple repositories, his NetFox, and this is open source, and you can commit changes to this. You can leave issues on here and contribute to the community. If you can fork this repository if he goes away or it's deprecated, and have the community take over and call it my NetFox version or whatever you want to do. So I think that, you're asking like, what happens if this plugin gets deprecated? Well, you pick it up, somebody picks it up and takes over. Yeah, I mean, that can be anything. What if Godot no longer? What if people don't want to support Godot anymore? I think that's just what's going to happen. Like I know that's kind of crass, but yeah, of course, if somebody doesn't want to maintain this anymore, like the maintainer of this is very busy and I'm sure doesn't have all the time in the world to do this. So that's one of the reasons why I talk about this, is to get the community involved, to get people like you check it out, go watch this, go read through his code and see what he's doing and make corrections and ask questions and help improve the documentation. Like that's, yeah, I mean, these are good questions. I mean, it's important. And I think that if you can contribute to an existing plugin that already has so much work and read up on those documents and learn, that's probably the best way to do that. I don't really have exact answers because I don't think this isn't really a black and white topic, right? This is all a whole bunch of moving parts and fluid gray areas. So to also comment on this plugin isn't written in like C++ or anything like that. All this code is GD script. So if you need to make a change, and this is coming from the maintainer himself, if you need to make a change to one of the NetFox internals, or if you want to go and look at the rollback synchronizer, here it is, rollback synchronizer. You can click on it and look at exactly what the code is doing in GD script. When you import this into your project, you now have this script in your project, and it can be edited you can put breakpoints or debug statements right here. You can edit this plugin inside your project if you need to somehow debug things. I would really recommend not doing that, and only doing that in an experimental sense, or if you're going to be very careful, because when you start editing an underlying library, if you are not careful, you will end up in a world of technical debt that you will not be able to get out of. I've had to abandon projects that had this happen to, that were very promising projects that had went in and made changes to the underlying networking libraries in such a manner that we had no idea where the changes were made. And there was hundreds of files in this library, and we didn't have the funding to keep working on it because we didn't know. It would have just taken too long given the amount of time in cash that this project had to actually complete it. So if you're going to edit the underlying project, do it in such a way where they can be undone or tracked very carefully, or in test projects, like just create like a dummy project. Don't change the underlying library in your like games production project. However, if you do that, then create a separate repository, create a fork of NetFox and add changes. And these are like my production changes, right? And then if there are changes that are specific to your game, then just manage that repository yourself. If it's changes that everybody should have, like it's an improvement, commit those back, right? Commit those back, or create a pull request back to this plugin so that the rest of the community can have it. So I've talked about this for like 20 minutes now, and I think I've kind of answered it. But I mean, it's a good thing to talk about, and I'm glad you asked it. But yeah, I think it's a fairly difficult task to undertake. I think it can be very time consuming, and it's hard to get right. There aren't too many people in the Godot world who have a lag compensation library, and I felt that this was one of I just pulled this up. I looked around, and there was like 2 out there that are doing this. And I'm not saying I selected this one because any other ones are not. It's not like a better or worse type of thing. This is just the one I decided to go with because I think this algorithm worked for what I was trying to do, and it worked really well. I was able to get this up and running in like a day. So I think that speaks volumes for the quality that was put into NetFox. And it does have issues. If you go through their issues, there are problems with it still, and there are things that should be corrected and options that should be made. I've made some comments and feedback already, but again, there's only a handful of people at most working on it right now. So I think that they would greatly appreciate more people coming in, join their Discord, go over to Foxsake's Discord and participate. There's some great people in there. They helped me out the other day for some of the live stream stuff I'm doing. So definitely check them out. So I've had some questions about just some simple set up with RPCs, and I try to answer to the best of my ability of what I have. But I think with stuff like this, you have to really read the docs and just step back and think about what you're doing. Thought PvP was the best option, cost efficient, works well with long video setting. Realize there's tons of risk. Unity Game Services or Amazon Game Lift. Oh man, I would not. I mean, Unity Game Services is easy to use, but Amazon Game Lift is, you kind of have to know some stuff. Oh, you have decent knowledge of AWS. Okay. These kinds of questions, it's hard to answer them because there's a lot to consider here. And I'm like trying to think like where would I even begin? Maybe I should just look at what Alex is saying. Alex has got some good feedback. Let's just see what they talked about. And then maybe if I have to fill in some gaps. Fighting games are hard to do over the network, especially if you're trying to get precise movement working. Oh yeah. Yeah, because that goes back to this lag compensation thing that I just talked about for like 30 minutes. So that's definitely going to be difficult. Fighting game. And I mean, if it's like a match style, like a Mortal Kombat, like heads up kind of thing, that's not terrible. I have done that. And I just finished my State Machine implementation with NetFox. I had to just basically revert back to reviewing the code instead of doing it on the fly because it got a little complex. But you can check that out in my video. My initial thought was Unity's entities netcode. Really good prediction rollback. That's cool. Yeah, see, that's one of the things about using Unity. They've got a lot of mature products in there that, to handle the common issues that most game devs will run into. Yep, Photon, tons of support there. Yeah, I mean, if you're not in the Godot and you're still trying to figure out Unity, go for it. Go check out Unity if you want. I'm really not going to talk about them anymore in terms of like whether or not I care about using them or not. I hate to recommend P2P because it's like, yeah, there is some complications with it. And now you have to like worry about NAT punch through and can you even connect back to the host computer? Are you using a relay server? So there's a lot to say about it and there's a lot to consider. And yeah, like to make that decision between Unity Gaming Services or Amazon Game Lift is I would use Unity Game Services. I think it's going to be every bit as cheap or as expensive as Game Lift, maybe cheaper. And then you get, I think, a much cleaner interface. You get it's a much more tailored interface, whereas Amazon Game Lift is a little bit lower level in terms of how it's presented to you. Now they've cleaned it up over the last few years, but I think you can. I just think that Unity, that game services interface is much cleaner and it's much tailored to somebody that doesn't want to deal with all the BS behind managing, Game Lift clusters and that sort of thing. They abstract away all that from you and you may have to pay more. I'm not really sure how the prices compare with that. And that said, W4, which is a product that I want to look into very soon, is doing this as well. So it's going to be the Godot version of Unity Game Services. And I want to start looking at them maybe tomorrow. Maybe I'll do a stream on them tomorrow and just start looking at the docs and maybe try to get it up and running. But so that's like Godot's version of it. And there's GD Sync is a really good solution for that. I shouldn't say really good because I haven't used it yet, but I've looked into their docs and I plan on doing a video on them as well. And they are right now only focused on P2P solutions. So if you're a P2P person, check out GD Sync and GD Sync. Check those guys out. They've even got a pretty cool demo game, lobbies, matchmaker, all that good stuff. They're not a dedicated server company. They do have they are in open beta. I think they said eventually they would do dedicated. I just wanted to throw that out there that they're mostly for P2P stuff right now. I would, consider those 3 or 4 solutions we mentioned. If you're comfortable with AWS, I don't think you necessarily need to use Game Lift. I almost wouldn't use Game Lift to start. It really depends on where you're at with your game. If you're ready to go and you have a game and you need a multiplayer infrastructure that's going to scale, if you're using this match-based fighting game. So I would almost just, if you just have nobody playing your game right now, or you want to put your game out there and you're concerned about scale, okay, if you're concerned about scale, you may want to use one of those services like GameLift and be able to like really just click a button or set the server count to 5, but that's really expensive. If your backend isn't too intensive, you could spin up a EC2 server and run multiple instances on your, in the one server somehow, and maybe figure out some kind of like local orchestration and maybe spin up or spin down local instances on that single server instance. I know that's a lot of work. Maybe somebody's done that. Maybe there's like a Docker way to do that. I would look into that as well. And that way you're, if that's kind of good for like, if you're just starting out and you just want like a handful of active, maybe you only have like 5 people playing at a time or something like that. 5 different matches going on. So you could almost do it that way. And I was thinking about creating like a little service that like you say, okay, find me a match, and like it hits an AWS Lambda function, and that Lambda function spins up an EC2 instance, and then it starts an instance of your backend game, and then you just like return the port. Now I haven't done this, but I'm pretty sure it's feasible. I like know it's feasible, so you could do it that way too. But again, that you're putting a lot of effort into something that should you just spend some money and use Amazon GameLift or W4. I don't know how W4's pricing isn't out yet, and they're still in beta, so they have some time to go. But this is a tough decision. Yeah, this is not a simple decision to make. But all right, so let me go down a little bit more and see what else we got going on here. While eNet is on the server authoritative games, can I make Nakama for matchmaking rooms and other stuff? Nakama just seems so expensive. How can I make one Nakama client as a server peer? How can I make one Nakama client as a server peer instead of a client? I don't know what an Nakama client is. I would assume you're deploying your backend build to a Nakama server, or should I implement my own matchmaking or creating rooms, lobbies system? I mean, that depends on what level of work you want to put into it. Like I've got a way to roll your own matchmaker lobby system, or you can use the couple that I reviewed at the beginning of the stream. I think Rivet, I know W4 is coming out with one. I think GD Sync even has matchmaking lobbies, albeit P2P. You might be able to shim it into whatever else you're working on at the time, depending on whether or not they support like handing it off to Nakama. Nakama probably has built-in lobbies. I'm sure they do. I know AWS even has some lobby system, but I think that's probably a little bit difficult to. I wouldn't go that route if you're not using their services. There's also like open. If you check in my Discord under resources, I have this list of hosting providers, which is constantly in motion. I think there was so by the way, to go back to a couple of the things about people talking about hosting, there's like a list of places you can like find stuff, information about. And it's not even exhaustive. Like I don't even have Unity on here because I'm not really working with Unity right now, but there was one in here called Open. It was like Open Match or something like that. Yeah. Anyways, I can't find it right now. But there are probably some open source matchmaking solutions, which if anybody knows and anybody watches this, let me know. And I'm sure there's some of those out there. I do have a video on it that I talked about before. It's I don't know if you can see that, but it's this build a Godot multiplayer matchmaker system. I use AWS and stuff, and really you're just creating a lobby through WebSocket that people connect to, and then once you have the match full, it just sends out the IP of the server that you want to connect to. And that's really all you need to do. So you could do that and then just connect back to whatever the Nakama server is and have all your game clients connect to that. I don't know if that's what you're asking, but I'd need a little bit more information. So, I know this was like written 11 days ago. I haven't been able to follow, but you did say you missed the live Q&A. So you're missing another one. But all right, so let's move on. Novaleaf, you want to write your own high-level networking framework. Well, why wouldn't you just use like eNet, whatever Godot has? Oh, because you want it to be partitioned into islands. Okay. Good luck. That seems. Oh, you found a proof of concept? Well, I mean, yeah, multiplayer synchronizer will do some stuff. I mean, I've covered it a bunch on my channel, but yeah, maybe I wonder. I don't know if it's going to hit all your requirements. And I'm pretty sure you can toggle visibility, but it sounds like you're trying to like turn off parts of the world, which I guess that's kind of visibility. Yeah, I don't know. I think we'd have to talk more a little bit about this offline. I don't think this is the forum for that, but yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, he's just commenting on this Rivet link that I posted earlier. Has anybody worked with inventories? I mean, just saving stuff. Yeah. Client server inventory synchronization. Cool. So he's got a dedicated server, server authority, client implemented input synchronizer. Sounds good. Sends RPCs. That sounds like he's got it going correctly. Man, put some returns in your paragraph. My inventory system is divided into interface and resource data part. Okay. Store several slot data resources. Okay. Server converts all non-empty slot data resources with item date and then sends. Okay. And then it converts back to the resource, creates a visual interface icon. Yep. Okay. Struggle with this a lot. System is quite difficult to implement considering that my game, although types of inventories such as quick slots and crates, well, you just create a different, dictionary for each one. Seeing issues with other players start interacting with their own inventories, is there a better way to make this system more convenient? Does anyone have experience? There is an open inventory library, I think, somewhere. Personally, I have not. We've got a reply. I tackled it on my own game, but this add-on comes with pre-built working in multiplayer. I can't suggest it as I've not tested. So yeah, Espresso, I've heard of these guys. So there are people out there that have built stuff for you. I know this guy. I know this Espresso Bits. Espresso Bits is doing the Steam plugin. I knew this sounded familiar. Look at that, Steam multiplayer period. Yeah, this is a good plugin. It's got some work, but I mean, it's still like early on. And anyways, getting off topic. So there are people out there that have developed inventory systems like this, but I think I don't know if it's a really trivial manner, right? Like creating an inventory system, you're going to have to translate from your database to your front end client. And, you can use dictionaries, you can save your data in JSON, right? JSON object. And that maps pretty, I think, consistently to a dictionary pretty well, actually. So I'm not really sure what your question is. You're having synchronization issues. Maybe you need to have like on update, like on use things, or if they're dragging inventory things, like you can have RPC calls instead of using synchronizers, or maybe you have like you can pull up, make a request every so often to make sure the database, the inventory systems are synchronized, or when they click on their bags, pop it up in real, like go make a request and pop it up, or keep it in a cache somewhere and then just keep that cache updated on your backend. I mean, there's quite a few ways to do this. Is there a better way to make it more convenient? Yeah, I mean, it depends on how much effort you want to put into it, right? Like you could do what I said and have like a cache system in between, and then you just like query the cache system. And I'm saying cache, like server side cache, because it's really quick. But if you're using like technology like DynamoDB or something, I mean, that's super fast. I mean, that's just your network latency. Those queries can be done extremely fast. And if you check out my matchmaking videos that I did, I have some really basic modeling for the like saving match data. And I would just do the same for inventories. And I think I touch on it briefly in there. But yeah, I'm not really sure what to say. I guess if I were going to implement the inventories, I would have like on request based, updates, like, okay, I click on a bag, or I would have like a periodic pull to make sure that they're synchronized. I don't know if I would use a synchronizer, like a multiplayer synchronizer to synchronize inventory. It would depend. And maybe it also would depend on like the type of inventory item, because you're going to have to save all those things in like a database. And then each time you want to use those items, you'd have to make a request to your backend, either through an RPC or something that would say, okay, this item is moved to here now. And then you just have to update that where that item or in your inventory table or your whatever, your row, you'd have to just add it to that. So I'm not really sure. I think this type of content or this type of question needs to be like a more back and forth. So I'd love to talk about this more. And that's why I kind of want you guys to come on stream and we can even like video chat. I'll chat with you guys on stream. We can like BS about it if you guys want. Someone asked about their code wasn't sending correctly. And so like, you know, there's something gets called and then we send a dictionary. And then if it has authority, make an RPC call. Well, first off, I think they knew that the RPC, this isn't how you would send it. I don't think that's, I think that's deprecated. I think you want to do what Uzkaz said, send data.rpc is correct. And he's saying it's doing nothing. So I had just commented, you know, if you're trying to host in this manner, if you're like the host, you're going to have authority to call it, but any peer, I believe, is like when you're getting data from clients to a host. But if you're like in a P2P setup and you have a host, it's not going to call to it. So I think you need to add that call local. And I think that ended up being his issue. And one of the last things I want to look at is, anybody have experience running Godot games? And I was similar. Have I done that? Unfortunately, I don't have experience with that. I wish I did at this point. I do have a Mac, so I should probably do it eventually. I've done it with Unity a few times, but I have not done it with it. And I know working with Apple's ecosystem is really can be a pain, especially Xcode. I mean, I love it. I think there's a lot of good stuff with it, but there's always like some, what is those? There's some like attribute or something that you always need to add to some permission thing to get something working. And there's always like problems with it. So maybe I'm just going to ask them to post some more information. Yeah, if you guys have game ideas or anything, come by and post them. If you want to help me test, occasionally I do need some testers. So join the tester squad. I don't think there's anything else going on right now. I think I've covered everything currently in the backlog. So if you are interested in these Q&A things, I tend to do about one a week. Oh wait, I have some showcase work. Well, I'll check that offline. But if you guys like, you want to share and show off what you've done, please come in here and we're happy to give some feedback on that. We've got a lot of really cool stuff going on in here, and it's great to see. And we're kind of a smaller community right now, so you could probably get some really good attention. Try to keep messages in the Discord, because I can't really always respond to meaningfully to direct messages. I've just got a lot going on, and if you post publicly, you're gonna have a better chance of getting your questions answered. So I think that's it for today. Thanks, guys. If I didn't answer your question, that doesn't mean I'm not trying to answer it, but please join the Discord and ask again, or keep an eye out for these Twitch streams. I don't have a set schedule right now because I don't have a set schedule in real life right now, and things are kind of fluid, especially over the next few weeks. So just keep an eye out. If you can make these, great. I will even live. We can chat live. We can just jump. I have Discord. I have good bandwidth on my Discord. I think I have like the level 1 tier or level 2 tier, whatever bandwidth. So we can get on there and do that if you'd like to chat about it on stream. So I appreciate you guys. And if you came by, thanks for watching, and please follow or sub. It's greatly appreciated. Anyways, I'm going to log off for today, but we'll see you next time.